Greetings, family. I want to talk to you today about the African Holocaust. Many people don't know about the African Holocaust. We never really discuss any of our history in such a way that will give us the kinds of consciousness to understand where we are in time and space and to address the problems that confront us in history at this time. The African Holocaust. Many African scholars mark the beginning of the African Holocaust with Pope Martin V commissioned Prince Henry of Portugal and put him in charge of something called the Royal Order of Christ. It was a type of corporation of the time. It was a time when there was no separation between church and state, and the church would set up a corporation very similar to a Secretary of State sets up a corporation or authorizes a corporation in modern times here in the United States. Well, Prince Henry was given charge over the Royal Order of Christ, which gave him access to what would be the equivalent to millions and millions of dollars today. And he took that money and he invested the money in 3 technological innovations that changed history. The first technological innovation that he invested in was something called the arquebus or agbus. It's a short barrel rifle, a handheld firearm. The next thing he invested in was something called the matchlock, and it was a firing mechanism that enabled the use of the arquebus or agbus to be able to shoot more rapidly than earlier versions of the technology allowed. It made it a practical war tool. In addition to that, this matchlock and agbus were mass produced and provided to mercenaries. And the third technological innovation was the development of a ship called the Caravel. And the Caravel was a fast-moving ship. You could get right up to the African coast and drop the side of the ship down. And you could carry up to 400 armed horsemen. And they could ride out and ride back in. And so this created a sort of a stormtrooper type of setup so that the Portuguese now had the capacity to come right up to the African coast, drop the side of the ship down, send up to 400 armed horsemen out of a single ship, and they would go in and conduct raids. In 1441, Prince Henry of Portugal sent the first expedition to Africa. 3 ships went to what is now modern-day Lagos, Nigeria. They went ashore killing men, women, and children. And they took 18 Africans from the royal family as hostages and took them back and gave them as gifts to the Pope to prove the success of their mission and to justify more funds. And after that, the Portuguese rained terror upon Africa. They went along the coast looting and plundering and mass murdering down the west coast of Africa, around the so-called Cape of Good Hope, up the east coast of Africa. And over a period of time, this became such an economically prosperous venture for the Portuguese that later just about all the other European countries became involved. And so it became a scramble for Africa because of the wealth that was contained in Africa. So they sought mineral wealth, they sought palm oil, they sought gold, they sought all types of products that they could take from Africa because Africa was a well-developed civilization. it had a well-developed agricultural system, and some of the things that we um, often we don't know about Africa. For example, the University of Sankore in Timbuktu was the center of learning for the world around this during this time. And there were universities in Guinea, in Gao, and a number of other cities along the West African coast. And the people were literate. They had writing scripts. There's actually a project going on right now to restore the works of Ahmed Baba, who was one of the leaders of the University of Sankore in Timbuktu. But if we look at what happened, Africa was terrorized, it was plundered, it was looted, and there were millions of people murdered. There are estimates ranging anywhere from 15 to up to 800 million people murdered over a space of a couple hundred years. And if we look at what happened there and recognize also at the same time the transatlantic slave trade started and end up transporting the estimates as high as 75 to 100 million people were transported, and most having died in the Middle Passage. If we take a look at around 1865, around the time of the Civil War, it's estimated that there was about 26 million Black Africans who have been stolen into slavery in the Western Hemisphere. Nearly 20 million of those people lived in Central and South America, mostly South America and Brazil and some of those areas. And there was nearly a couple of million in the Caribbean and about 4 million in North America. And so if we look at this population in the Western Hemisphere, then we became the capital to fuel the development of these civilizations. And so in terms of looking at this overall picture of what happened, if you look at the story of the mass murders that took place in Africa, and there's a lot of information we can look at, the atrocities of Leopold in the Belgian Congo. We can look at the atrocities of Lord Kitchen in the Sudan and all the way to South Africa. We can look at the atrocities of Jan van Riebeeck and many of the others, and Cecil Rhodes, whom was the founder of De Beers Diamonds and claimed responsibility for killing up to 50 million Africans. And now we have a Rhodes Scholarship in his name because he was one of the richest men in the world and endowed a chair at Oxford University. If we began to look at our history and recognize what happened to African people and what happened to our consciousness, it was a Holocaust, this unprecedented in the history of human civilizations. And it is important that we come to an understanding and knowledge of our history so we can understand where we are. We need to know what time it is. We need to understand who we are and where we are. And we can't do that if we don't begin to recognize what happened to us. And so that's why it's important for us to memorialize our African Holocaust so that it will never, ever happen again. We need to recognize what happened so that it will never, ever happen again. We must elevate our consciousness to recognize what has happened to us and why we're in the conditions that we are in worldwide. And it has to do with those 3 technological innovations and the advantage that it gave to others over us. And during this period of time, there was a wiping of our consciousness so that we wouldn't understand who we are. We wouldn't understand our history. We were disconnected to the consciousness of the past, of what happened and what was going on to us. And now we find ourselves in America. And we are positioned to be able to begin this process of healing. It's time for us to begin to heal. And healing will start with raising our consciousness and gaining an understanding of our past.